Thank you all for coming. Sound Choice Pharmaceutical Institute is a nonprofit organization. We are located in Seattle, Washington, and I'm not sure if Oregon is the most liberal state in the union anymore. I think Washington is a close second, maybe a tie. I remember when I first founded Sound Choice Pharmaceutical Institute, I met Bishop Vasha, and I met him down at a private home in Portland. And he said to me, I never thought anything good would come out of Seattle. So as John mentioned, I think most of you are aware of the Planned Parenthood videos that have come out. Is there anyone here who is not aware? 70% of the American public, probably until a week ago, were not aware of these videos. And that's because the news was not covering them. Were you surprised when these videos came out? No. Were you shocked? Yes. When David Daleiden called me about 4 years ago, he had heard me speak and had read some articles about our work. He had no idea that this was going on, and he called me because he wanted to do just this, an undercover expose of the harvesting of aborted fetal parts. I had been telling people for years that some of these babies were probably harvested alive because of how scientific publications described taking the tissue and the optimal processing of this tissue, particularly for heart or cardiac and brain or neural research. And what I stressed to David Daleiden was, that's what you need to get evidence that this is happening. And I think that the uproar and the furor over these videos illustrates a time-worn concept that a picture paints 1,000 words. Because I could tell people for years that this was happening from reading the scientific publications, but it took these videos to actually bring it home so people could see what was happening. And while they don't show a living baby actually being harvested, when the technician describes a baby with a beating heart, whose face is cut through with scissors so that the brain can be taken intact, you can see that happening. You don't have to have the picture. We can all see it in our minds and in our hearts. This is not the first time that Planned Parenthood has been exposed. In 1968, there was an award-winning scientific publication called The Artificial Placenta, in which an OB-gynecologist took aborted babies who were born alive, and he kept them alive for hours, I believe up to 24 to 48 hours, swimming in a fish tank. Ted Kennedy led a congressional and Senate effort to stop this research. He then turned later and became a huge proponent of the use of aborted fetal tissue. Why? I don't know. But clearly, when he was in his right mind, he was outraged at this type of research. In the late 1990s and the early 2000s, Life Dynamics did an undercover expose, and they also got national attention, congressional investigations, and many of these companies doing this harvesting shut down. What happened, though, is that other companies began to pick it back up. So even with this most recent expose, if we let the pressure die down, it is likely that this will continue. And indeed, Planned Parenthood vows that they will continue to harvest the body parts of aborted babies. Why does this continue to happen? John Brahaney covered my talk in a nutshell. And I actually did an interview with a Seattle Times reporter today, and I wish that I could have taped the interview and just played it for you tonight, because it discusses everything that I want you to learn and take away from this panel discussion this evening. People believe that this is necessary and that it has provided benefit. And that's why they allow it to continue. What I want to tell you tonight is the truth. And the truth is that it is neither necessary nor has it ever paid off. The two most commonly cited goods from aborted fetal research, I believe Bill O'Reilly recently covered this just a night or two ago, are the claims that the rubella vaccine and the polio vaccine would not have been possible without aborted fetal research. That is an absolute lie. There is an alternative polio vaccine, and indeed, it is the vaccine that's most widely used, called IPOL, I-P-O-L, and it did not involve the use of aborted fetal research. So clearly, nothing was necessary in the use of aborted fetuses. As far as the rubella vaccine, there are rubella vaccines in Japan that are made without the use of aborted fetal material at any step, that are as effective, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to show you, safer than the rubella vaccine that was made here in the US. So these beliefs, widely held beliefs, are based on misinformation and actually withholding of information and are absolutely not true. I like this cartoon because I think that it illustrates the problem here in the United States and in other countries. And the problem is that the people sitting in the pews who have loved ones suffering from grievous illness desperately want cures. And like the pastor, they mistakenly believe that the only way to obtain those cures is by using aborted fetal material. They don't know that alternatives are available and possible. When someone is desperate to cure the disease of a loved one, it's easy sometimes to relax your morals and justify something that normally you would never support or justify. What we need to do is to get the truth out. And the truth is there are alternatives, and they're safer, and they work better than the aborted fetal solutions. Another reason that this happens, particularly in the vaccine area, is because our public officials put in their years at the NIH, the CDC, or the FDA, and they leave those organizations and they go to work in private pharma where they make millions and millions of dollars a year. I believe Dr. Gerberding's starting salary at Merck after she left the CDC was over $11 million. Actually, I think it was $13 million a year. Similarly, the current executive director of Sanofi's worldwide vaccine division is a former director of the NIH. Now, normally, this really wouldn't be a problem, having our FDA and NIH and CDC officials leave and go to pharma, because in most cases, the pharmaceutical industry is self-motivated to have safe medicines. Because if the medicines that they produce are not safe, they will be sued. And so they want to work with the FDA and NIH to make sure that their medicines are safe. And when they hire them subsequently, they're probably getting the best people. Unfortunately, in the vaccine area, Congress gave the pharmaceutical companies carte blanche immunity in the early 1980s. There is no incentive for the pharmaceutical companies to make safe vaccines, to do safety testing, and there is no incentive for our public officials to make them do that because they want to leave the NIH, the FDA, or CDC and go work for these pharma companies someday and make lots of money. So this is a huge problem. Another contributor to the mess that we have is the practice of the pharmaceutical industry in marketing. And this is from the Pew Charitable Trusts, It's back in 2012, which is the last one I had found, that the pharma companies have spent $24 billion a year marketing to physicians and $3 billion a year marketing to consumers. This is one reason why the cost of drugs in the United States is so high. The budget for marketing is greater than the budget that it takes to discover and get a drug to market. Just to put that in perspective, in the United States, there is one sales rep for every 12 to 13 MDs, and they're highly trained in how to influence the buying and prescribing decisions of physicians. The mission of Sound Choice Pharmaceutical Institute and our sister company, AVM Biotechnology, is to shed light on these practices, to let people know the truth about alternatives, and where there are not alternatives, to produce safer, better, affordable, and ethical alternatives, so that no one will ever feel compelled to exploit another human being for medical progress, nor justified in doing so. So another question that I think is important to ask is, has this practice paid off? Has the use of aborted fetal material in research actually delivered a bang for its buck? This graph was taken from a publication in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that was published online August 17th of this year. And what you see on the left y-axis are the number of new drug approvals, new molecular entities, or new drug applications that have been received. And you can see that since 1954, these have fallen and remain flat. On the y-axis on the right, in the green, what you see is NIH funding to academic institutions, which has gone up dramatically. It's over the last 50 years that the practice of using aborted fetal material has become so pervasive. You can see the funding has increased dramatically, but we have gotten no bang for our buck as far as medical progress and new drugs to market. We have a lot more scientific publications, we have a lot more scientists employed, but we do not have any productivity for what has been done or the money that has been put into this. People are waking up. As a matter of fact, California and Maryland, two of the biggest embryonic stem cell cheerleading states years ago, who have wasted billions of dollars on embryonic stem cell research, have turned, and they are now funding adult stem cell research. They don't announce this to the public. Every time they announce success, if it's adult, they drop the word adult. But when you read their annual reports, and many people have done this, they are clearly funding adult stem cell research, and they've dropped embryonic. And that's because adult stem cells work, and since they've spent billions and billions of dollars, they have to have some return to show for their money. So they've lost their moral stance, and their moral stance used to be, they would say, we have a moral obligation to use embryonic stem cells to cure disease. And now they're actually taking a utilitarian stance and using the adult stem cells, the truly moral stem cells that actually work in patients. Dr. Haas mentioned the federal lawsuit. It was the Shirley versus Sebelius lawsuit. It's actually Shirley and Deisher versus Sebelius that temporarily shut down embryonic stem cell funding in the United States. And what that lawsuit did, even though we eventually lost at the Supreme Court because they refused to hear it, it shut down embryonic stem cell funding, and it created uncertainty so that scientists and clinicians were driven to adult stem cell research, and those who had moral objections, but who were afraid to come out with those moral objections because they would lose their academic positions or lose their federal funding, and those things truly did happen, were given an excuse so that they could refuse to work on embryonic or aborted fetal stem cells and focus on adult stem cells without coming out of the closet. And the result is that we have 14 FDA-approved adult stem cell products in the United States. And most recently, the new clinical trials are working to make those adult stem cells work even better. So if we want to keep aborted fetal and embryonic stem cells out, we have to beat them in the market. And on the bottom, I'm showing you a new trial from a company called Tygenix, who works with a type of stem cell called a mesenchymal stem cell. And what they are doing is they're doing repeat stem cell injections that all these companies have learned are necessary to get the optimal benefit from adult stem cells. So I want to share with you just a little bit of what we have done at AVM Biotechnology. And our focus has been to develop drugs that make adult stem cells work optimally so that we can eliminate any perceived need for aborted or embryonic stem cells. These are pictures taken from a study done in Australia in horses. And what we have been able to do with our drug, pre-treating before the stem cells, is take the recovery of these animals down from 6 to 12 months down to under 1 month with only one stem cell injection. So it's very exciting, and we're ready to move into clinical trials so that we can increase the penetrance and the effectiveness of adult stem cells. Our business model is to partner and license with any adult stem cell company so that their product can work optimally and so that we can have the bandwidth to reach the myriad of diseases that are in such need of new treatments and that we as a small company internally don't have the bandwidth. So we are partnering and licensing with every company working with moral stem cells in the area. So I want to turn and I want to briefly talk about the vaccines. And this is a list of the US fetal manufactured vaccines. At the top is rubella. The MMR2 contains the aborted fetal rubella, so that also is problematic. The chickenpox vaccine, the ProQuad, all hepatitis A vaccines, and the Pentacell vaccine. Additionally, there are some other vaccines in the US. There's the Imovax, the rabies vaccine, which is questionable. And Debbie Vintage of Children of God for Life, who is here somewhere, maintains